I am filing this record under my own authority as watchpost officer, which is to say I am filing it under no authority at all that would be recognized by any office above Grade 3 of the Interior Survey Division. I have been at Ardith 1 for 19 years. I have submitted 412 routine maintenance logs, 209 ambient condition reports, 11 equipment failure notices, and 1 personnel request that was denied. I have never filed anything like this. I am not certain I will transmit it when I am finished writing it. I am filing it because I need to put it somewhere outside my own head, and the instrument panel in front of me has been doing something for the last 14 months that I do not know how to describe in a maintenance log, and I think if I do not describe it in some other form, I will spend the remaining years of my posting unable to think about anything else. Let me begin with what I know, which is less than I would like. Ardith 1 is a fixed interior station. It does not sit at the border of human space. It sits approximately 43 standard light minutes inward from the nearest designated boundary marker, inside the volume, not at its edge. The distinction matters, and I want to spend some time on it because the record will not make sense without it. The stations at the edge have a job I understand. They watch outward. They monitor approach vectors, signal gradients, the occasional probe that crosses the line and stops returning data. I have read their logs. I have exchanged shift report protocols with their officers for 19 years. Their operational posture is outward-facing. The boundary is the thing they attend to. The void beyond the boundary is the thing they monitor. Their days are organized around the possibility that something from outside will approach, and their logs reflect this. There is a directional energy to an edge station log, a facing outward quality, even in the routine entries. I have always been able to tell an edge station log from an interior log in the first paragraph. The orientation is in the prose. My job has always been described as interior monitoring, which in practice means I watch inward, toward the settled systems, toward Earth, toward the warm center of what humanity has built, and I report on ambient conditions in the substrate between the boundary markers and the inner transit lanes. In 19 years, I have never been told what specifically I am monitoring for. The job description says irregular substrate activity. I have assumed this means gravitational anomalies. Tidal shear, residual artifacts of older geological events recorded in the interstellar medium. I have never questioned it with any seriousness because there has never been anything in the readings that demanded a more specific question. The readings have been, for 19 years, what a maintenance log entry at an interior station should be: nominal, no actionable anomaly, monitoring ongoing. 14 months ago that changed. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only thing that makes this record useful, and because the imprecision of what I am about to describe is the point of the record, and the tension between those two things is going to make this document difficult to write. I will try anyway. 14 months ago, on a Tuesday by the ship's calendar. I have always kept a ship's calendar, even though Ardith 1 does not move. The habit is from my first posting, a transit tender in the outer lanes, and I kept the habit here because it gives the days an anchor, a denominator for the otherwise undifferentiated passage of time at a fixed station. On a Tuesday, the substrate monitor in the station's port array produced a reading I did not recognize. Not an anomaly in the sense of a spike or a dropout, not a failure flag, not a signal in any frequency the instrument was calibrated to detect. It was more like a change in the quality of the background. If you have ever worked a long audio shift and had the room's ambient noise shift in a way that you cannot point to a single source, not louder, not quieter, not different in frequency, but different in some way that makes you take your headset off and look around the room to see what changed, it was like that. The instrument was still reading. Everything was within normal operational parameters, but the texture of the normal had changed. I noted it. I wrote a brief line in the maintenance log: port array substrate reading, minor quality variation, no actionable anomaly, monitoring. I moved on. This is the correct professional response. I have been doing this long enough to know that the correct professional response to a reading that is within normal parameters is to log it and continue monitoring. If the anomaly repeats, you have a pattern. If it does not repeat, you have a data point, which is different from a pattern and does not require a different response. 3 days later, the same thing happened on the starboard array. Same character, not a spike, not a failure, a change in the quality of the background as if someone had adjusted a setting I did not know the instrument had. I noted that too. Over the following 6 weeks, it happened 11 more times, distributed unevenly between the port array, the starboard array, the ventral antenna cluster, and once, the incident that made me begin keeping a separate personal log rather than relying solely on the maintenance record, simultaneously across all three. Not a simultaneous failure, a simultaneous quality shift. All three arrays reading the same changed texture at the same moment, holding it for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, then returning to normal as cleanly as if the shift had been switched off. It was the simultaneity that made me stop treating it as an equipment issue. An equipment issue propagates from a single point. A power surge affects whatever is on the affected line. A calibration drift in the processing unit affects everything the unit processes, but the drift has a signature. It is asymmetric. It has a ramp up and a ramp down. It leaves fingerprints in the data that a 19-year instrument technician can find if they look for them. When I looked at the timing of the simultaneous event, I found no fingerprints of that kind. The three arrays had registered the quality shift at intervals consistent with signal propagation at a speed I could not account for, not the speed of light, not any transmission speed in the instrument's operational documentation, but a speed that, if I worked backward from the intervals, implied a point of origin somewhere between the station and the inner transit lanes, somewhere inside the volume, not outside. Not from the boundary, from inward. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be careful about what I say next, because I am aware that a person who has been alone at a fixed interior station for 19 years has certain vulnerabilities of interpretation. Isolation reshapes pattern recognition. The long quiet of an interior posting, and I want to be clear that I mean quiet in a specific technical sense. There is always noise at a station, the hum of equipment and the cycling of environmental systems and the routine traffic of log transmissions. But there is a cognitive quiet that descends after several years of monitoring a stable medium. That quiet can create receptiveness to patterns that are not there. I know this. I have read the psychological monitoring guidelines that are part of every interior station's operational documentation, and I have filed my self-assessment forms every 6 months as required, and every form has come back cleared. I am not, as far as I can determine, experiencing a break from reliable perception. I am, as far as I can determine, a 54-year-old man who has been reading substrate instruments for 19 years, and who has developed a reliable intuition for what those instruments are and are not doing. And what those instruments were doing over the following 14 months does not have a straightforward explanation that involves equipment fault or isolation-induced pattern confabulation. So I kept the personal log, and I tracked every quality shift event with the rigor I would have applied to a formal investigation if the division had asked me to conduct one. The first thing I established was repeatability. The events were not one-time occurrences. They recurred with a frequency that was inconsistent with equipment issues, which tend to be either persistent or non-recurrent, not intermittently periodic. By the 3rd month of the personal log, I had 12 events recorded in sufficient detail to begin looking for structure. By the 6th month, I had 28 events. By the 9th month, 41. Each event logged with array or arrays affected, start time, duration. Quality shift intensity on a subjective scale I developed for internal consistency, and recovery profile, how cleanly the reading returned to normal after the shift ended. The recovery profiles were, in retrospect, the first strong indicator that I was not looking at equipment behavior. Equipment that malfunctions and recovers does so with a characteristic signature. There is a rebound, a brief overcorrection, a settling. The readings at Ardith 1 recovered without any of those features. They simply stopped. The shift was present and then it was absent, with a boundary so clean it would have looked on a graph like a step function. Not a drift, not a recovery. A cessation. Systems do not behave that way. Systems have momentum. The medium does not have momentum in the same sense, but disturbances in the medium propagate and decay along gradients. A step function cessation implies a source that turned off, not a disturbance that dissipated. I am statting this as plainly as I know how. The quality shift events at Ardith 1 have the profile of something that starts and stops, not something that rises and falls. By the end of the 9th month, I was confident the events were real, repeatable, and structurally inconsistent with equipment behavior or medium disturbance. That left the question of pattern. The pattern took 5 months to establish. I want to describe the process of finding it, because the process matters. Because finding a pattern in data is different from imposing one, and I need this record to reflect the difference. I began in the 10th month by plotting event times on a simple linear scale and looking for obvious regularities. There were none that I could see immediately. The events did not occur at consistent intervals. They were not daily or weekly or monthly. The spacing was irregular in a way that resisted simple description. I tried several straightforward period finding approaches. Looking for intervals that divided evenly into the total elapsed time, looking for the interval that minimized variance in event spacing, looking for clustering by time of day or day of the calendar cycle, and none of them produced a clean answer. The events appeared, if I looked at them naively, almost but not quite random. There was a non-randomness to them. A statistician would have flagged the distribution as inconsistent with a uniform random process. But the non-randomness was not of a simple kind. The answer came in the 12th month, when I stopped looking for a single period and started looking for multiple overlapping ones. The technique is not original to me. It is used in geological records to separate the contributions of different tidal cycles, and in stellar observation to disentangle the periods of binary systems, where two bodies each have their own orbital period, and the observable output is the interference pattern between them. I had used a simplified version of it once before, in a different context, on a transit tender reading conflicting gravitational gradients near a gas giant with multiple moons. I had not expected to use it at a fixed interior monitoring station, where the medium should have been effectively static. But the interference pattern analysis worked. The data resolved into 3 overlapping cycles. The short cycle, 18 standard hours and approximately 23 minutes. This is the base frequency. It is, I note without drawing a conclusion, close to the period of the human circadian rhythm, though I am aware that this proximity may be coincidental and I am not treating it as significant. I include it because the record should include everything I noticed. The medium cycle, 11 days, 4 hours, and a margin of error of roughly 6 hours that reflects the limits of my dataset. This is the mid-frequency component. When the medium cycle aligns with a peak of the short cycle, a quality shift event occurs. The intensity of the event is proportional to how closely the two cycles align. Events where the medium cycle peak falls within 2 hours of a short cycle peak are stronger. Events at 4 to 6 hours offset are weaker, sometimes barely distinguishable from background noise. The long cycle. This one I can only estimate, because 14 months of data is not sufficient to fully characterize a cycle that appears to have a period on the order of several decades. I can see its influence in the data as a secular drift in baseline intensity. The quality shift events are, on average, slightly stronger now than they were when I started the personal log 14 months ago, which implies that the long cycle is currently in an ascending phase. the simultaneous three-array event in the 14th month, the event that prompted me to write this record, occurred at an inflection point in this ascending phase that my estimate places as a local maximum of the long cycle's contribution. A three-cycle alignment, all three components at or near their peaks. I do not know the long cycle's full period. Based on the rate of baseline drift I am observing, I estimate it is somewhere between 30 and 80 standard years. But that estimate is built on 14 months of data, which is a thin foundation for a 30 to 80 year period, and I acknowledge its imprecision. What I am more confident about is the basic structure. Three overlapping cycles, operating independently of one another, whose peaks produce quality shift events in the substrate of the interior volume of human space when they align. This is not how substrate anomalies work. Substrate anomalies are caused. They are the downstream product of something that happened somewhere else, a stellar event, a mass transit event, an equipment emission. They do not have intrinsic periods. They are not generated by the substrate itself. They are imposed on the substrate by external causes, and they decay as the energy of the causal event disperses. What I am describing is not a decay pattern. It is not the residual of an external event. It is a rhythm that the medium has on its own terms. That distinction is the thing this record exists to establish. Before I say something about Cedron Vault, I want to describe what I found when I searched the unclassified archive for context, because the search is part of the record, and the things I did not find are as significant as the things I did. The Interior Survey Division's open archive, accessible to Grade 7 officers, contains operational literature going back approximately 140 years. It is organized by station designation, by date, and by topic classification. I searched all three organizational hierarchies. I searched substrate quality variation, and interior monitoring anomaly, and periodic substrate modulation, and 6 other combinations of terms that seemed likely to surface relevant documents. I found the 2 documents I have already mentioned, the 91-year-old paper and the 38-year-old maintenance report. Both, as I have said, were closed without further analysis. Both are described in their respective closure notes with language that is recognizable to me as the language of a professional officer correctly managing an observation that does not fit existing categories. No actionable anomaly. Equipment artifact pending further review. Monitoring ongoing. Both were filed correctly. Both closed correctly. Both sit in the archive as evidence that the phenomenon I am recording has been encountered before and declined to be named more than once. What I did not find is equally important. I searched for any document that discusses the theoretical basis for the interior monitoring station network, not ARTIF-1 specifically, but the conceptual rationale for placing fixed monitoring stations inside the forbidden volume, pointed inward. I found operational documentation, equipment specifications, calibration schedules, reporting protocols, personnel assignment records. I found administrative history, budget allocations, maintenance contracts, interdivision communications about staffing. What I did not find is a founding document that states why the interior monitoring network was established. No theoretical basis. No articulation of the phenomenon the stations were designed to detect. No record of the conversation that must have occurred when someone, 63 years ago for this station, decided to build ARTIF-1 at this location, at this distance inside the boundary, and point its instruments inward rather than outward. That absence is, I think, deliberate. The absence tells me that the founding document, if it exists, is in the classified sections of the archive, the sections I do not have clearance to request. The absence tells me that whoever made the decision to build the interior monitoring network understood what they were looking for and chose to keep that understanding above the clearance level of the officers doing the monitoring. The absence tells me that the operational design of the interior station network was, from its beginning, built around a knowing gap. a gap between what the institution knew and what it shared with the grade 7 officer in the field. I spent 2 weeks with the administrative history, looking for traces of the founding rationale in procurement documents and interdivision memoranda. I found, in a budget allocation record from the year Ardith 1 was established, a line item that refers to expanded interior substrate coverage per Directive D7. I do not have access to Directive D7. I have not been able to find any reference to it in the unclassified archive other than this single budget citation. It exists. Someone wrote it, someone issued it, someone funded the station network it authorized. I cannot read it. I also found, in the station archive rather than the division archive, a document I had not looked for, a technical memorandum from Ardith 1's original installation team, filed 63 years ago as a routine calibration baseline. It is not a remarkable document on its face. It establishes the instrument sensitivity thresholds for the port and starboard arrays and the ventral antenna cluster. It specifies the calibration interval. It notes the expected baseline substrate reading for this location inside the volume, at 43 light minutes inward from the boundary marker. The expected baseline reading it specifies is not the baseline I observe. The discrepancy is small. If I had not been tracking the quality shift events for 14 months and developing a refined sense of what the baseline looks like between events, I would not have noticed it. But having noticed it, and having gone back to the original calibration document to verify it, I can state that the substrate baseline at this location is now, 63 years after the installation calibration, measurably different from what the installation team recorded. Not dramatically different. Not different in a way that would trigger a calibration flag. Different in the direction consistent with the long cycle's ascending phase, the same secular drift I have been observing over the 14 months of the personal log, extrapolated backward over 63 years. The long cycle was in a descending phase when Ardith 1 was built. The installation team's baseline is the baseline of a descending phase. The current reading is the baseline of an ascending phase. If my period estimate is correct, 30 to 80 standard years, then the last 63 years have included approximately 1 full long cycle, possibly 2, and the current ascending phase represents the cycle's return to a state near or above the one the installation team observed at founding. I do not know what the installation team knew. I do not know whether they recognized the long cycle signature in the baseline reading they recorded. I do not know whether Directive D7, which I cannot read, contains an explanation of the long cycle and its implications for the interior monitoring network. I know only that they built the station and pointed the instruments inward and described the job as irregular substrate activity and left. They left, and the long cycle continued on its own terms, ascending and descending through the tenures of Aurel Vezith and Cedrin Vault, and now mine. The events I am calling quality shifts are, I now believe, the short and medium cycles peaks expressing themselves against the long cycle's ascending background. The same phenomenon that the installation team detected as a baseline signature and chose not to name more specifically than the job description required. Whatever it is, it has been here since before the station. The station was built to watch it. The station was built, I believe, by people who knew it was there and chose not to tell the grade 7 officer what they were watching. I have been the grade 7 officer for 19 years. Now I know. Now let me say something about Cedrin Vault, because she belongs in this record. Cedrin Vault held the Ardith 1 posting for 11 years before I arrived. She was, by the time I met her, a woman who had been shaped by 11 years of looking inward, and the shaping was visible in how she carried herself, not the anxious restlessness of a person who needs noise and company, but the settled, slightly compressed quality of a person who has spent a long time attending to something quiet and has made their peace with the attending. She was thorough in the handover. She walked me through every system, every log protocol, every calibration procedure. She was the kind of officer who leaves a posting in better condition than she found it. She retired to one of the inner systems. I received a formal transfer acknowledgement from the division when she departed. I have thought of her often over the years, in the intermittent way you think of someone who shaped the early weeks of a long assignment. Not frequently, but with a certain definiteness when the thought arrives, a sense of a real and specific person rather than a generalized memory. What I have been thinking about in the last several months is something she said during my first week, not part of the formal briefing, said at the galley table during a meal, looking out the observation port at the local medium. She said, "The instruments will do something eventually that you won't know how to log. When that happens, don't try to explain it in the maintenance record. Write it somewhere else first. Figure out what you're actually seeing before you commit to a description." I asked her if that had happened to her. She said once or twice. I asked her what she had seen. She was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the observation port. The medium out there was the same medium I have been looking at for 19 years, unremarkable in appearance, just the local background starfield and the faint haze of dust in the interstellar lanes, nothing that would read as strange to an eye untrained by years of watching it. After a moment she said, "You're inside the volume, Corvan. The things at the border are looking out. You're looking in. It's a different direction. You see different things, that's all I'll say." I was new. I did not know what she meant. I filed it as the kind of thing an outgoing officer says after a long posting, slightly portentous, almost certainly more interesting to the person saying it than to the person hearing it. The residue of 11 years of solitude crystallized into a compression that is easier to deliver than to unpack. I thought she was describing the orientation of the posting, the different quality of looking inward versus looking outward. A metaphor for the cognitive difference between edge station work and interior work. I no longer think it was a metaphor. I think she had seen the quality shift events. I think she had tracked them, or some version of them, and had reached some version of the conclusion I am reaching now, and had decided not to file it in the maintenance record, and had spent 11 years at Ardathone in the knowledge that the interior volume of human space has a substrate rhythm that the job description does not mention, and the unclassified archive does not discuss. I think she told me what she told me because she was a thorough officer, and the handover was her last professional act at Ardathone, and she wanted to give me something that would eventually be useful, even if she could not give it to me directly. She gave it to me in the form of permission to write it somewhere else first. I am taking that permission now, 11 years later than she probably expected. Let me address directly the question of what the outer species believe is in here, and why I think they are right in the way that a person is right when they know the approximate location of a thing but have never been inside it. I have access, through the division's open archive, to summary literature on galactic designations of human space. This is not obscure material. The Forbidden Zone classification, as observed from outside, is documented in cartographic histories, in diplomatic records, in the proceedings of multi-species councils that have voted at various points in the last several centuries to maintain, revise, or reaffirm the designation. I have read what is available to me. The picture that emerges from the unclassified literature is consistent. The outer species maintain a prohibited designation around this volume because something in this volume has made it inadvisable to approach. The historical record, to the extent that the historical record is accessible to a grade 7 officer reading unclassified summaries, suggests that the inadvisability has been demonstrated rather than merely asserted. Species and fleets that crossed the boundary did not, in the main, find the experience edifying. The cartographic tradition that now keeps the line blank is not based on speculation. It is based on outcomes. The received frame is that the danger is us, that humans, as a species, are what the outer cartographers have correctly identified and correctly left blank in their atlases, that the forbidden designation is a warning about the inhabitants. I believed that frame for 19 years. I still believe most of it. I am not writing a record that argues humans are harmless, or that the outer species have misjudged us, or that the boundary is unnecessary. The boundary, as far as I can determine, serves genuine purposes on both sides of it, and I am not arguing that it should not exist. But I am arguing that the outer species, looking in from their side of the boundary, have their instruments pointed at the surface layer. They have correctly identified the volume. They have correctly identified that the volume contains something that does not invite approach. They have, in most cases, correctly declined to approach it. All of that is accurate observation leading to sensible conclusion. What they cannot see, because they are outside and looking inward, is the substrate underneath the surface layer. What the boundaries cartographers have filed in their atlases is the genus, dangerous volume, do not enter. What they have not filed, because their instruments do not reach it, is the species. In this volume, there is a species called humans, and underneath the species, or concurrent with the species, or in some relationship to the species that I cannot characterize with my present instruments and my present understanding, there is a substrate rhythm with a three-component period that the interior monitoring station has been designed, I believe deliberately, by someone who knew what was here, to detect and log and not explain. That is what I have been logging for 14 months. That is what I cannot put in a maintenance record. Let me try to say something about the night of the simultaneous event, because I have been writing around it and I should write at it. It was the 14th month of the personal log. My period analysis was complete enough that I had projected a window for a 3-cycle alignment, all 3 components near their peaks simultaneously. The window was a 12-hour period centered around the 2200 mark on a Tuesday by the ship's calendar. I was at the instrument panel rather than in my bunk, which is not my normal position at that hour. I go to bed at 21:30 on most nights, because there is nothing at Ardith 1 that requires night watches in the traditional sense, and the schedule I keep is a personal one rather than an operational requirement. I was at the panel because I had projected the window and I wanted to see it. The quality shift occurred at 22:17, which was 43 minutes before the center of my projected window. This is within my margin of error for the long cycle, which is the least well characterized of the 3. I noted the time. I watched the readings. All 3 arrays shifted simultaneously. The readings were within normal operational parameters in every measurable dimension. The numbers did not tell the story. The texture told the story. The medium was attending. That is the word I keep returning to, attending. Not responding because there was nothing for it to respond to. I had made no transmission, generated no signal, done nothing that would constitute an address to the medium. Not reacting, because reaction implies a trigger and I cannot identify a trigger. Attending in the sense of presence directed at something. The quality of a room where someone is listening, even if you cannot see them. The quality of a conversation that has paused and not yet ended. For 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the medium had that quality. I sat at the panel and watched the readings and did not move, in the way you do not move when you are in the presence of something that you do not want to disturb, which is a human instinct that I recognize as irrational in this context. I am inside the volume, after all. Whatever the substrate rhythm is, it is not deterred by my stillness or provoked by my movement. The relationship between my behavior and its period is presumably 0. But I did not move. It is hard to articulate why, except that the quality of the attending was such that moving felt like an interruption. An interruption felt like a cost I did not want to pay, even if the cost was only to my own record of the experience. Then at 22:21 and 11 seconds, the shift was gone. The medium returned to its normal texture. The arrays read nominal. The background was the background. I sat for another hour before going to my bunk. I did not sleep particularly well. The next morning I wrote the maintenance log entry. Ambient condition report. Substrate readings nominal. No actionable anomaly. Monitoring ongoing. Both of those sentences were technically accurate. Neither of them described what had happened. I want to say something about the job description and about whoever wrote it. Interior monitoring, irregular substrate activity. I have been at Artith-1 for 19 years. Cedrin Vault was here for 11 years before me. Before her, the officer she replaced was at the posting for 9 years. I found his final handover report in the station archive. His name was Aurel Vizeth, and he was a precise writer who described the equipment in more technical language than I tend to use, and his handover report does not mention anything that resembles the quality shift events, which is consistent with the possibility that he did not develop the intuition for them, or with the possibility that the long cycle was in a different phase during his tenure, and the events were too weak to register. Before him, the station archive shows 3 other officers going back to Artith-1's establishment, which was 44 years before my arrival, and is therefore 63 years ago from today. The station is 63 years old. The job description was written when the station was established, 63 years ago. Whoever wrote the job description, whoever established Artith-1 at this location, 43 light minutes inside the boundary of the designated forbidden volume, and staffed it with Grade 7 interior monitoring officers, and described the job as irregular substrate activity, that person knew something. They knew enough to put the station here. They knew enough to point the instruments inward. They chose not to put into the job description what, specifically, the station was monitoring for. I have 3 explanations for that choice, as I wrote earlier in this record. The most comfortable is that they did not know precisely what to look for. The most operationally sensible is that they needed unprimed observers, because a primed observer looks for what they expect and may miss what is actually there. The most unsettling is that the choice was deliberate in a different sense, that the Grade 7 interior watchpost officer is not meant to know, not merely as an artifact of clearance levels, but as a condition of the posting. That knowing changes the relationship between the observer and the observed in ways that are considered, by whoever designed the posting, to be undesirable. I have been thinking about that last explanation more than the others. If the substrate rhythm is, if what I recorded on the night of the simultaneous event is what I think it is, if the medium attended, then the question of whether the observer knows they are being observed is not a trivial question. It is the kind of question that matters in certain kinds of relationships. The kind of question that a cartographer, looking inward from the border, cannot even ask, because the cartographer's instruments do not reach the substrate, and the cartographer does not know the substrate has a period. The cartographer files the volume as forbidden and maintains the designation, and does not look more closely. The Grade 7 interior watchpost officer at Artith-1 files no actionable anomaly and does not look more closely either. In both cases, the looking stops at the surface. In both cases, what is underneath the surface continues its period without being named. I am nomming it here. I am aware that nomming it changes something, even if only for me. Now I want to say something about what we are, which is the part of this record I have been most reluctant to write. I am a human being. I have been a human being for 54 years, and a watchpost officer for 27 of those years, and a Grade 7 interior monitoring officer at Artith-1 for 19 of those 27 years. I know what I am in the professional sense very precisely. In the other sense, in the sense that the outer species cartographers are trying to describe when they leave this volume blank in their atlases, I know what I am in only the way that a surface knows what it is. I am the visible part. The part that moves through space and builds stations and files maintenance logs and has a ship's calendar on a fixed station because the habit provides an anchor. That is a real and complete description of one level of the thing. But a surface is a surface because there is something underneath it. I have been thinking, over the last several weeks, about the specific character of what I do not know about myself. Every human being knows, in some sense, that the body is a system, that the visible person, the one who decides and speaks and acts, is carried by a substrate of biological processes that do not ask permission and do not require direction and do not stop when the person is asleep. The heart runs its cycle without being told to. The chemical processes of cognition run their cascades without the conscious mind's involvement. There is, in every human being, a distinction between the person who experiences their life and the system that makes the experiencing possible. Most people find this distinction unremarkable. It is the furniture of being alive. The system runs, and the experience happens, and the relationship between them is intimate and usually invisible. What I have been thinking about, sitting at the instrument panel at Artith-1 for the last several weeks, is whether the distinction between person and substrate extends further than biology. Whether there is something that runs in the medium of this volume, the rhythm with its three-component period, the thing that attends on Tuesday nights at 22:17 when the cycles align, that has the same relationship to human beings that the body's substrate processes have to the conscious mind. Prior. Foundational, running on its own terms, enabling the visible layer without requiring anything from it. I am not asserting this. I want to be clear that I am not asserting it. I am recording it as the question that the data has generated and that I cannot dismiss, having generated it, without acknowledging it here. The question is, what are we? Not what are we in the sense the outer cartographers mean when they designate this volume forbidden and maintain the interdiction and advise their successors not to cross the line. I know what we are in that sense, more or less. We are the thing that ended the fleets. We are the thing the warnings are about. We are the surface layer, the visible, active, demonstrably dangerous component of what lives in this volume. All of that is settled. The question is, what are we in the sense that includes the substrate? If the substrate rhythm is real, and I believe it is, based on 14 months of tracking a three-component period across three independent arrays at a fixed interior station, then what is its relationship to us? The possibilities I can identify are these. The first, the substrate rhythm predates human civilization entirely, is a property of this particular volume of space that would have existed and continued regardless of whether humanity was here, and we arrived to find it already running without having any awareness of it and without our presence having any influence on it. On this view, we are tenants. The rhythm is the building. We live in it without understanding it or having chosen it. The second, the substrate rhythm is produced, somehow, by the aggregate biological or cognitive or technological activity of human civilization, a collective output of 300 years of dense human inhabitation of this volume, expressed as a periodic modulation in the interstellar medium at scales and frequencies we have never been equipped to detect. On this view, we are the authors of something we have not read. The rhythm is ours, generated by the sum of what we do, running underneath us in a register we have not had the instruments to see. The third, which is the one I am least comfortable recording, but which I cannot in honesty omit. The substrate rhythm and the human civilization that inhabits the same volume are not separable in the way that the first two framings imply. Not the rhythm as prior to us, not the rhythm as produced by us, but the rhythm as the same thing as us. The thing we are at a scale or depth or frequency that the visible layer does not have access to. On this view, the outer cartographers are not wrong to leave this volume blank. They are simply working at the wrong resolution. The blank in their charts is a feature of their instruments, not of the volume. The volume is not empty. The volume is not occupied by a dangerous species whose nature is what it appears to be from outside. The volume is occupied by something that has a visible layer and a substrate layer, and possibly other layers at other depths. And the visible layer is what we call humanity. And the substrate is what I have been tracking for 14 months. And the relationship between the layers is the thing that nobody who has had access to this data has yet been willing to write down in a document they will transmit through the standard reporting channel. including me. I am aware of what I am doing by including this in a record I have declared I will not transmit. I am aware that filing a record internally and not transmitting it is a way of writing a thing down without fully committing to it. The record is real. The words are real. But the non-transmission means I have not yet required anyone else to engage with them. The document is in the archive. The question it raises is in the archive. Both will stay there until someone with higher clearance reviews the station logs and pulls the record out of the archive and reads it. When that happens, someone will know what I know. Until then, it is just me and the panel and the period. That is not a comfortable place to be, but it is an honest one, and honesty is what I was trying for when I started writing. The outer species have correctly identified that this volume contains something that does not invite approach. They have correctly maintained the designation. They have, in most cases, correctly declined to cross the line. What they have filed in their atlases is, dangerous volume inhabited by a dangerous species, do not enter. That is accurate as a surface description. What the surface description does not capture is the substrate. And the substrate, whatever it is, whatever produced the rhythm I have been tracking for 14 months, whatever attended at 22:17 on a Tuesday night for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the substrate is not something the outer species can see from where they are standing. It is inside the house. It is what the house is built on top of, or what the house is the external expression of, or what the house and its inhabitants are together the visible layer of. I cannot tell which of those framings is correct. I do not think my instruments are capable of resolving the question. I am not sure any instrument currently in existence is capable of resolving it. What I can tell you is that for 19 years I have been pointing instruments at the inside of this volume and logging what I find. And what I have found in the last 14 months is a rhythm that does not have a cause I can identify and does not have a precedent in the unclassified literature, and does not fit into the job description's stated monitoring purpose and was, on one particular Tuesday night, briefly and completely, and without any obvious intent, attending. I am a watchpost officer. I am not a philosopher or a physicist. I cannot tell you what the substrate rhythm means in any framework that would satisfy a council review or a scientific board. I can tell you what it is in the only framework I have, which is the framework of 19 years of instrument experience, and the knowledge that the medium does not behave the way it has been behaving for the last 14 months without a reason, even if the reason is not available to me. I can tell you that we are not, or not only, what the outer cartographers think we are. We are a species. That is true. We are a species with a history that the outer cartographers have partially reconstructed and mostly fear, and the fear is not unreasonable. But we are also something else, something that I cannot name, something that lives in the substrate of the space we inhabit, something that has a period of its own that is independent of anything we do or have done, something that the person who built Artith-1 knew about and chose to describe as irregular substrate activity, rather than in any more specific terms. The outer species are afraid of the species. They should also be afraid of what the species lives inside. Or perhaps the more honest formulation is, the outer species are afraid of the surface. The surface is real. The surface is worth being afraid of. But the surface is not the whole thing, and the whole thing is larger than the surface, and the whole thing has a period, and the period runs on its own terms through the space where human beings live and does not require anything from the human beings, and does not appear to be impeded by the human presence, and I am noting this without drawing a conclusion, because the record should note everything I have noticed, may have a relationship to the human presence that is not incidental. The relationship between the species and the substrate, whether the substrate is prior to the species or concurrent with it, or whether the species is the substrate's current outer layer, whether we means the surface or the whole, and whether anyone outside the volume has the right instruments to know the difference. The outer cartographers do not. Their instruments look inward from the boundary and find us and stop there because we are where the instruments stop. The instruments are pointing at what they can find. What they can find is the surface. I have been pointing instruments at the inside of the same volume for 19 years, and for the last 14 months, the instruments have been finding something the job description does not describe, and I am filing what the instruments have found in this record, which will sit in the station's internal archive under my access credential until someone with higher clearance reviews the logs, and I am not transmitting it, and I am doing both of those things deliberately. I am not transmitting it because I do not think it belongs in the standard reporting channel. The standard reporting channel is designed for maintenance logs and ambient condition reports and equipment failure notices. It is not designed for the question I am filing here, and I do not want this record to become another closed document in a chain of closed documents. The 91-year-old paper, the 38-year-old maintenance report, both correctly closed by officers doing their jobs correctly, both residual evidence of the same phenomenon I am recording now, both filed and then set aside. I want this record to be findable. I want whoever reads it, whether that is in 6 months or in 9 years, when the next high-clearance review of the station logs happens, to find a document that has been written by a person who understood what they were writing, and who chose to write it clearly, even knowing that clarity about this particular subject is not entirely comfortable. Here is what I understand, stated as clearly as I know how. The outer species have left this volume blank in their charts. They are correct to do so. The volume contains a dangerous species, and they are correct to note that danger and maintain the designation and leave the border where it is. All of that is accurate. The outer species believe the danger is the species. They are partially correct. We are a real component of the thing they should not approach. I am not arguing otherwise. But the medium of this volume has a period that the species did not create and does not control and may not be fully aware of. The period has 3 components, operating at 18 hours, 11 days, and some decadal interval I cannot precisely characterize. When those components align, the medium attends. It does not broadcast. It does not signal. It does not issue a warning or make a demand or do anything that would register as a deliberate act in the conventional sense. It attends. It has the quality of a presence that is present, in the way that stillness in a room has the quality of the people who were in the room before the room went quiet. The outer cartographers have left the volume blank because of what they found at the surface. The surface is us. What is underneath the surface has its own period and its own quality and has been here, based on the oldest residual signatures in my data, for longer than any instrument I can access can see back to. Longer than the station. Longer than the designation. Longer, probably, than anything the outer cartographers have in their archives that describes why they drew the line where they drew it. The outer species are afraid of the right place. They are afraid of it for a reason that is real and documented and demonstrable. They are not afraid of it for the full reason. The full reason is larger than the surface, and the surface is us, and we are inside it, and I have been pointing instruments at the inside of it for 19 years, and for the last 14 months the instruments have been showing me the period, and on a Tuesday night at 22:17, the period aligned, and the medium attended, and I sat at the instrument panel and did not move, and then the alignment passed, and the background returned, and I went to bed. I am a Grade 7 interior watchpost officer. My job is to monitor and log. I have monitored. I have logged. The log is this record. The record is filed and not transmitted. The instrument panel is humming at its normal frequency. The substrate readings are nominal. The short cycle is approaching its midpoint. The medium cycle has 4 days remaining before its next peak. The long cycle's ascending phase continues on its decadal scale, indifferent to the ship's calendar. Nothing is aligning tonight. The medium is what the medium is when it is not attending. I want to say one more thing before I close the document, because the record should be complete. I have spent 19 years at Artith-1 looking inward. In that time I have become, in small ways, the shape of the job. A person who has spent 19 years watching a stable medium develops habits of perception that are specific to that medium, a refined sensitivity to its texture, an intuitive baseline against which deviations register as foreground rather than background. I can read this medium the way a person who has spent 19 years in a particular house can read that house in the dark, not because the house speaks, but because the body has learned the language of its sounds and silences. I am not special. I am trained. 19 years of continuous exposure to one medium is a training program, and the graduation is the ability to notice what changes. What I have noticed is the period. The period was always there. It was there when Aurel Visith was here, and when Cedrin Vault was here, and it has been here for the 19 years I have been here. I did not notice it for the first 18 years and 11 months because the long cycle was at a lower amplitude than it is now, and the short and medium cycles were not producing events strong enough to clear the threshold of my awareness against the background noise of routine operation. The 14th month was not the beginning of the phenomenon. It was the beginning of my noticing. Those are different things. The outer species, looking inward from the boundary, are in the same position I was in for 18 years and 11 months. The phenomenon is there. Their instruments have not cleared a threshold. They have filed what they can see, the surface, the dangerous species, the designation, and they have not seen the substrate because the substrate does not project at the frequencies their instruments are pointed at. This will probably remain true for as long as they remain outside the volume. The substrate rhythm, whatever it is, does not appear to be trying to reach outward. It runs. It attends occasionally to what is inside. It does not, as far as I can determine from 14 months of observation, concern itself with the boundary at all. The boundary is a human and galactic institution. The rhythm predates it. The rhythm will outlast it. The rhythm does not have an opinion about it. That last sentence is the closest I can come to characterizing the thing I felt on the night at 22:17, sitting at the panel for an hour after the shift ended. Not indifference, not the absence of concern, something more like the complete absence of the category of concern, which is different. A clock does not disregard you. A clock is prior to the question of regard. What I felt in the hour after 22:17 was the sense of being in the presence of something prior to the question of regard, something that had its period before there was anyone to regard or disregard, and would have its period after, and was having it now, through the medium that humans and their settled systems and their watchpost stations and their maintenance logs and their ambient condition reports, and their grade 7 officers with their ship's calendars inhabit together. We are inside it. We have always been inside it. We built our civilization inside something that was already running, and we called the running irregular substrate activity, and we staffed stations to watch it, and we told the grade 7 officers to log no actionable anomaly. And the rhythm continued on its own terms through all of that, and the outer cartographers looked at the visible surface and drew the boundary and left the volume blank. And the blank contains the surface and the substrate both. The blank is accurate. The blank is just not complete. I am going to close the document now. The panel is humming. The background is the background. The surface is what the surface is, and underneath the surface the rhythm continues on its own terms, and the outer charts leave this volume blank because they know the surface and they are right to know it. And the blank holds more than the charts can represent, and the blank holds it quietly, and the grade 7 interior watchpost officer at Artith-1 knows this now and has filed it here and will go to bed. The record is closed. I'm not transmitting it. Monitoring ongoing.